Okay, so this is our final roundtable. This is the final part of our day-long workshop. So Kalpana is going to lead the roundtable. She's the moderator, and we have presenters who's Kalpana again. She will introduce. But I just want to say one other thing as a housekeeping. Please don't go away just after that, because the girls have actually prepared a live performance of Khadar Ki Ladkiyan, and they're really keen to show that. So please wait till after the roundtable, and the girls will do the live performance, and then we're all free to go. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. This is the last session, and I think everyone is tired, but it's been, I think, a fascinating day to bring together feminism, art, digital, urban, the range of geography, sociology has been, even for me, a jaded workshopper. I must say it's been quite a fascinating day. So I have three speakers with me. Padmini is just sitting here because she likes to be in the front. I know. So there's Dr. Janaki Abraham, who's Associate Professor in Sociology from the Department of Sociology, Delhi School of Economics, University of Delhi. There is Sohini Bhattacharya, who is the President and CEO of Breakthrough. And there's Arunava Dasgupta, who is the Head of Department of Urban Design at School of Planning and Architecture, Delhi. So we have actually quite an interesting set of people to help us, I think, to in some ways give a perspective, but also not really tie together. It's not possible to tie together, I think, the discussions of today. But I think what has come out is that the city is a project in the making, right? The city is not something that is once and for all made. And there are many voices that go into this project of making a city. And I think, and we have sort of meta-narratives like the smart cities, right? And then we have the bottom-up narratives like the Khadar Ki Ladkiyan. And each one of us, in some senses, both as a resident or citizen of the city, as well as, I think, as someone who's working in the city, whether as a sociologist or as a, running an organization, working on social change, or as an urban design teaching, we're trying to bring some meaning into this exercise, and Delhi is a chaotic, mad city. Despite everything, I do love the city, I must confess. And I think that's something, we love and hate the city, maybe in different ways, but all of us. So I'm going to just, I think, throw open first to each one of you to talk about, if we look at the current discourse of cities, and we look at things like gender inclusion, women's safety, inclusive cities, smart cities, really, what are, if you could just, maybe I'll begin with Arunav, to give us your perspective on these different dimensions of the way that a narrative of a city is shaped, whether it's by the government, whether it's by civil society, whether it's by academia. What are the different elements that go into shaping this narrative of the city?
Good afternoon, and thank you for calling. This is a huge, huge question, and I just thought I'm trying to figure out where to start. But let's start with the fact that the focus on cities, at least at the central government level, right, is recent. It has not had a very long history. And starting with the JNNU-RM, I think we had a clear shift from looking only at cities as recipients of problems of migration to what should happen from within cities and making lives better in terms of quality of urban life. I feel that shift allowed us to ponder over what have we been doing with our cities as agents of change, right? If we at least look at it from the developmental perspective through the eyes of the planner, our cities had been looked at large entities to be directed and guided for the next 20 years. So long-term goals of what the city should move towards. This kind of an overview of the city at the larger level on a long-term basis has yielded, I would say, fragmented results. It may have yielded some kind of positive results at bits and pieces in various endeavors, but it has not helped change the conditions of lives across the entire population of our cities, whether it's the small or the big one. When the shift to focus on cities from within happened with the JNNU RM, I must share with you one of the very strange kind of research work that SPA had received from the Central Ministry, asking us to find out an alternative to master planning, right? We did not know where this was going, but it was a one question kind of a research agenda that was given to us. What is the alternative to master planning? And the first statement said that master planning did not necessarily, has not necessarily made our cities better. Unfortunately, the project went to the planning department, who after a long time on deliberation created a very fat report saying it's master planning which will make the cities better. It's implementation which is where the problem lies. So there's this question of conceptualization and imagination of the city versus its realization. And that was when the debate started. So JNNURM bypassed the questions of the master plan through creating what was called the city development plan, which was project-oriented. And so that something could be realized. The 20-year vision was not getting realized. I'm just saying this to take us a little, back in time, very, very recent, because it is from there that all the other missions happened. The Smart City Mission, Hriday, Amrut, they all happened with this idea that master planning for 20 years is not necessarily creating ground level change. And therefore, mechanisms for change has to be sorted as, looked at as alternatives. And the Smart City Mission is such a case where the entire mechanism of delivery, governance has been seen to be an alternate to the existing system. So the mayor is no longer the main person for the city, even if he is an elected person. Councillors do not have that kind of say. And we have a totally different machinery put in place to help this projectized scheme to come into realization. So this is what is happening at the largest level, at the level from, let's say, the top-down way of how cities can change. I think what it has at least done for all of us is that it has allowed us this momentous opportunity to re-evaluate how cities are getting made, as you were rightly saying. And even if you look at the name, under the name of smartness, are we looking at smart planning? Are we looking at smart governance? Are we looking at smart management? Are we looking at smart ways of implementation? Each one of these are now under question. And I think that's at least the merit of getting into such a phase. With the complexity that we have and the spread of urbanization that we have, I do not think that 3 years is anywhere a situation to judge the way the mission is going. But obviously there has been issues about it. And I think the points that you had mentioned about what are the parameters that needed to be seen, when we discussed the questions of smartness, we did not tell ourselves smartness for what, right? Is there a vision for the Indian city overall, and then we become smart to achieve that, right? Or every city creates its own vision to be some kind of city, and then we have a smart agenda for it. And in my opinion, the larger vision that cities have to be inclusive, that cities have to be sustainable environmentally, economically, socially. I think those are fixed. goals that every city has to move towards. But the smart city mission or any other mission have not said that this is the universal goal for all our cities. So some cities may have had created projects which are gender-based or gender inclusivity-based. Some cities are talking about child-friendly cities. Some smartness is about traffic and traffic management and mobility. But we are not saying that overall these are the qualities that we would like to get into. I think that narrative has not been enunciated, at least. I have a feeling that the counter-narrative, which is happening from ground below, is tending to say that there are these universal goals which need to be put in place at every locality or at every situation that the city's conditions are talked with. And it is these goals that needs to be a part of any mission. I feel that this is the narrative that we should be talking about at length. And maybe as the panel goes, we can discuss it more and more.
I just want to, I totally agree, and I feel like, in a way, not just asking smartness for what, but smartness for whom.
Yes.
And fundamentally, if we are looking at cities that need to be inclusive, democratic, and equal, rather than highly unequal, which is the way our cities have gone, then how do we want to proceed? Because one of the problems with, the way in which this whole smart city project has proceeded is that it's fundamentally about this public-private collaboration. And the public-private collaboration is really about the state asking private companies to implement. Private companies are not there to do charity. They are not there to do good. They're there to make profits. So there is a mismatch in terms of what the idea of being inclusive, the idea of being democratic, the idea that this is, about barabari, it's about equality, and the idea that here are these companies and, the mission is structured in a way in which, there's a CEO and so on and so forth. It's very much about big business, which then will proceed according to what will bring them their profits. So I think that, in the whole smart city, one is skeptical about what will come out, because we've seen the way in which, in the name of development, highways and, flyovers and so on, have been flyovers for whom? It's not for the thela wala, it's not for the cycle rickshaw wala, it's for the big fast cars. And, that in itself tells us about what the vision for our cities has been. And I think that in the morning, this had come out about technology equally, because the vision is also one which sees technology as the fix-all. Iske saath sab kuch ho jayega. That the model is of Singapore, the model is of various, Singapore, Shanghai, and so on. And that technology will bring us that. So it was, it's interesting in a way that whenever we are Commonwealth Games, for instance, the idea was put away the poor. It was like, build up screens to hide them. And in the smart cities, it seems like the development model equally is going to be, if you can't, move people further and further away, so that some part of the city can be smart. It can be smart for also our international guests and for, and so on and so forth, and for those who can pay for those services.
Thank you. I think, bringing in the issue of democracy, I think is a very important one, because there is, and sort of counterposing that to the corporate model of so is it governance or is it management? I think that is the issue. When you talk about governance, there is an accountability, a different kind of accountability, which today, say, the mayor doesn't have in our country, in our cities. And we know globally that the cities that have had actually the most significant change are the ones where the mayors have power, because they're accountable to the citizens at the end of the day. Whereas you have a CEO of a mission, he or she it's an elected position. It's a very different dynamic. So I want to actually now come to you, Sohini, as in a sense, a practitioner, as someone who is working, leading a large organization, trying to bring about change. And, what is the kind of vision with which you and your organization work? I know you look at things like a lot of work on communication and behavior change and stuff like that, but I know you also do a lot of work around addressing gender as a key component of inequality in women, in people's lives.
So, and I'm not doing Facebook or Twitter, I'm just looking at my notes. So, so one of the things that I'm going to be unapologetical about is the fact that, keeping both these perspectives in mind and looking at a meta-narrative, I'm going to really look at a very narrow narrative, which is talking about gendering the smart city. And I've read many documents on smart cities. I do not see the word gender in any of them. People talk about energy, transportation, and when it comes to actually in some way mattering to safety, the only thing that we talk about is CCTV cameras, and many of them are not working in many of the places that I've seen. So what inclusiveness are we talking about? I do not see any trans voices in there. I do not see any sex workers' voices in there. I do not see adolescent girls and boys' voice in there, because those are important parts of a city. So that's one of my one of the main grouses that we as an organization working on violence against women and girls have all the time. There is no about building, really an inclusive city from either on an online space or an offline space. And this has not become a conversation in mainstream where we are really talking about this. It has really been, it has organizations like Safetipin and Jagori who've kind of taken the conversations forward within echo chambers, within talking to people like you and me, but where is the mainstream conversation around this, and how can we help bring these conversations mainstream is another thing that I want to talk about. From the perspective of Breakthrough, the organization that I represent, we work on mindset, changing the mindset, changing large-scale behavior and attitude where gender is concerned. And it is a systematic process. You have to have a larger conversations, which is on the mainstream, but you have to also work with girls and boys and young, men and women on the ground to kind of change those conversations. So we work with 10,000 women and men in a factory space in Faridabad. And one of the things, so the problem is like this. One of these women faced this problem where her husband came and said, "Tum वही same auto लेके क्यों काम पे जाती हो?" So, you might be having a scene with that auto wala. So this is one of the scenario of the women that she's facing. On the other hand, the women do not feel safe taking autos because the auto wala is all, constantly adjusting the rear view mirror or playing really, really raunchy songs that make them feel very uncomfortable taking those autos. So na ghar ka, na ghat ka, so where is the space for the woman in that commute, which is something that we need to address. So we've been running this campaign for the last few days, over the 16 days of activism with autowalas in this Faridabad, Mevla, Meghrajpur, Vasalva, and Dabua, in these three areas that we work, trying to talk to them in a kind of a chai pe charcha thing and say that, can we look at the commute from the perspective of a woman? What would make the woman feel safe in your auto? It's not just the sticker saying this auto, respects women. That is not going to do. Can we give you a playlist of songs that you can play, which are raunchy, which has the beat, which has the melody, but is completely, talking about different things than a woman's body? Will that make you feel more alert and also feel upbeat about driving your auto? So there is, negotiations on that, and there is conversation on that. But we can do only this much, So how do we kind of take this to a larger scale? How do we kind of make this mainstream? How do we close the gap between the meta-narrative and these efforts like Ana Jana? By the way, I love the name, life is all about Ana Jana. So, how do we kind of close the gap between these is what I'd love to kind of talk about.
Thanks. I think you have brought up I think both of you brought out an important point. Actually, all three of you is what is the vision of a city, right? I mean, I don't know if you said that, the vision has not been given in a smart city, but actually what has unfortunately happened because in a sense of a lack of imagination in a lot of the, the bureaucratic and other circles, smartness has become a vision rather than a path. Yeah. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about that in terms of, how do we actually, as an urban designer, as a school where you're training young people to become your city makers, how do you impart this idea of a vision? Unless we work with a vision, all our tools become our visions.
I think one of the first things that we try to get students to question, all of us to question ourselves, is what constitutes vision, and is problem solving enough, right? So unless and until we can move beyond the questions of the problem and solve them, we will not be able to say that there is something more that one needs to achieve beyond solving problems. Not to say that solving problems is not necessary, but to say that visionary idea includes the problems that we face and helps solve them while we achieve something more. So that's a point that we are always struggling with, and one of the reasons we struggle with it is because of the sheer burden of the complexity of our cities. That our cities are complex, they're very, very problematic in many ways. Problems stare us in our faces, and we have the tendency to be wanting to solve them straight away. So if the traffic is a mess, traffic signaling has to be handled, right? And if traffic signaling has to be handled, some technology has to be adopted. And if that technology has to be adopted, is computation the way to do it? And if computation is the way to do it, then what kind of method of computation will help solve it? Right? So that's the path. That's the path that we take. And in this process, because we've reached computation and we are in the computation era, we say this is our savior in solving the problems. But that is not necessarily the discussion of constituting or generating a vision. Now, and in this question of generating a vision, I think the question that was raised just now about whose vision is it becomes very important, because then we start by saying that, okay, is this one person's vision? And I am the landlord and I am the main person who will say what the cities of India should be, or is it a collective vision? Now that's when the questions of participatory discussions come in. In a way, we are asking our students and our fraternity within the school to be able to try and say that they are citizens first and designers later. And or at least that they're citizens while they're designers, right? So it's like asking ourselves that can there be a designer in the midst of a community, and that community is, I am a member of that community in which I can play a designer's role. So can a doctor, so can any other. But recognizing that I'm a part of that community within which we operate, I think becomes one of the ways to see whether there can be a way to collect visionary possibilities or ideas, rather than saying it's my vision, which is the designer's, planner's vision. So, so the making of vision, I think, also has its own, philosophical as well as any other route that you would like to take. But I'm being frank enough to say that we are not necessarily pursuing that in academia also, right? And the academia, I think, is falling into this idea of problem solving, and it is what the cities demand is what we give, not question what we are giving, right? And the idea of questioning takes us to the idea of forming a vision. And vision formation, I think, is a task which has been elusive, at least in architectural schools and in creative disciplines like that we are in. Making a concept drawing happens after the design is done, usually, right? Because the design has come up because I want it that way, and then a concept has to be created about why did I want it that way, right? So I think these are problems that we are facing. We have not been able to resolve it, but like you said, it's one of the most primary dimensions of telling us how to move forward, rather than be stuck where we are.
Janaki, I want to actually, ask you to reflect on a couple of things. One is that, we're looking at some level, having the both of you on this panel is also looking at pedagogy, right? Because it is a sociologist as well as the urban planner who both come to, in some ways begin to talk about the city. And sociology has an old history, of looking at urbanism as a way of life. But I think a lot of earlier work on sociology, especially in India, is focused on the village and the rural area. And the city, is sociology of urban sociology a real discipline? And if so, what is it we're looking at as, in that pedagogy? And what needs to be changed to make it relevant to bring about social change? Or the collective voice? Or any of the kind of things that you said, when you first spoke?
Tough question. No, it's true that sociology, in the early years was really overwhelmingly sort of preoccupied with the village, but over the last 20, 30 years, urban sociology has really developed very significantly. And I think, one of my sort of points of contention in a way has been that the town, in the whole process of globalization and the whole buzz about the global city, it is towns that have actually been neglected. And in the sociology of India too, you see, very important work that's come up on Bangalore, on Calcutta, on, down Delhi, a lot of work, even the Sarai project. But towns really have got much less work has been done on towns, and that's something that, I've been interested in the last few years. I think that one of the other problems actually with urban sociology has been that there has been this focus on low-income neighborhoods to the exclusion of other neighborhoods, and how you could see neighborhoods as really occupying one city together. Now, much of that thinking has come from the idea, and actually, this was really true in America and in American sociology, that a lot, because of the idea of the delinquency and so on, and you see that reproduced now to the inner cities. So poor neighborhoods were the neighborhoods that were studied. And in recent years, I've got very interested in the neighborhood, and I actually wanted to, when you raised the question about, okay, what are the ways in which there are visions for the future, I think it really is to study a range of different kinds of neighborhoods and say, okay, so what is the vision on the ground? Meaning, so like you've done in the project on Kadir, so what is the imagination that young men and women have of how their neighborhood can be different, how it can be safe, how it can be inclusive, how it can be democratic? What are the kinds of processes that you can put in place? Because there's also been a critique of what has happened with middle-class neighborhoods in terms of RWAs, So on the one hand, okay, RWAs have taken a lead to address issues of a neighborhood. On the other hand, how inclusive, what has been their imagination? So, from personal experience, I know, for instance, that in middle-class colonies in Delhi, the RWA has been instrumental to keep people out. Yes. So they have created gated colonies where they have no right to create a gated colony. Because parks in Delhi, that's one of the USPs of, Delhi and the design of Delhi, but many of these parks are like government property, and they should be free to all children. But you see locks on swings during the day, and the argument is that, acha, bacche shor machate hain, you know, dopair mein bude log, whatever, people elderly are sleeping and so on. And it's, you know, that's not the argument, you know. You know that this is an excuse to say, acha, hamare parks apne liye, ki ye, you know. So, so I think that to think of how, I mean, how is it, and it's not like I have the solutions to say what and how we can do this, but surely if one can think of neighborhoods in a larger, more inclusive way, and not just in terms of the middle class colonies, you know, because in Delhi that's another thing that one sees, and one sees this everywhere. I've been working in Bikaner. My research in recent years has been in Bikaner, and in Bikaner, I mean, the caste, the mohallas still map onto caste identity. And the Dalit mohalla is just outside the walled city. So when people imagine ki hamare mohalle or hamara shehar, it's not inclusive. It's very much acha apne liye, hamare jati ke log, you know. And I think that that's one thing ki jati or dharm ko leke, how can you actually genuinely be inclusive in the imagination of, you know, of what the vision is, but also of how you want to teach it, you know.
Sohini, you brought up this issue of the conversation that needs to be had, and I think that is what all of us in this room certainly are trying to do. Now, who all should actually be at the table in this conversation, in your view, and how do we make it a more equal conversation?
Right. You know, I think social media is social media and media actually is one of the best places to have this conversation, because there's a large number of users on that. You know, I remember we did a Facebook game a few years ago on where you know, the lights would go down on the screen and it would become darker, and you had to spot the women, you know, and they would, you know, start disappearing, you know, as the screen got darker. It was to kind of really bring home to point that women are not seen in public spaces, or women do not have the mobility to just wander around, you know, as Samira's films showed us, you know, just to kind of loiter around, sit in a park and just not do anything, right? I think young people, again, and putting the burden on them a lot, but they are the best people who can kind of change the dialogue, change the narrative, you know, change the mindset in huge ways to go. So some of these kind of conversations that can happen on social media, and which are interactive and which is digitized, so that kind of kills a little bit of the access point. But at least, you know, there are large number of people who are accessing online media now, and that could be a wonderful space of having that conversation. But I think really what we need to do is somewhere, and especially where sexual harassment in public places and where women are concerned, I think we need to bring in boys and men into the conversation, as we have always been talking about it. Because if you want to create a preventive atmosphere on your, you know, atmosphere on the streets, environment on the streets, there is a need to bring in boys and men into that whole conversation. I think there's also a need to look at infrastructure in a way that it is inclusive and not just, you know, excluding people out. Talking about the neighborhoods, the whole sense of inequality that is so inherent in us as human beings is kind of perpetuated in the neighborhoods. In the building block that I live, there are separate lifts for, you know, service people and for us. You know, I mean, I've been fighting this battle in my building for years now, you know. So it gets perpetuated further and further. So how to kind of do away with that? I think there is a need to kind of bring in people who are looking at infrastructure in a way so that these conversations can happen. And I think there is actually need for legal enforcement in terms of the safety and security of women and girls are concerned. We all know how difficult it is to implement that. So if you want to create a preventive atmosphere, I think all these three has to kind of come together and work and talk in a big way so that we at least get the conversation going. But I think we can have a good beginning on social media and projects like the Anagana project, you know, these girls singing, you know, their songs. I think these things should actually be taken forward for larger information and for doing it in an entertaining way so that people understand what the problem actually is.
Thank you.
I have to just extend this. There's no other way, not no other way, there's at least one very important way of moving ahead is to target men. Just target, I know from the very, very short history of this lab that our students presented, the first time that Rithi and Shweta offered this lab, they didn't get any male student, right? And in the second round, they've got 4. In this room, there are 7.
Yeah. Yes.
In this room, I did a very quick head count, and we are 36 versus 7, right? So there are maybe we are growing, but not at the level in which we should be growing, and yes. So unless we make, how do we target this? As a program coordinator, I might say this lab is only open for men. Yeah. Right, and then see what happens, right, and where does the discussion go, and maybe the mentors of the lab find new strategies of gendering the lab, right, which is something probably we need to think about, and I feel it's a very, very significant question, cultural question, in terms of where our orientation should be when we talk about communication also, not just the medium but also the communication itself.
No, I think there was a very interesting, in the city of Bogota in Colombia, there was a mayor about, I think, 12 years ago. He held something called the Take Back the Night. You've heard of the Take Back the Night, right? These are marches that, they're normally done by women's groups, feminist groups. But in this case, the mayor said, okay, this is the program of the city. And it's a Take Back the Night where we request men to stay at home so that women can go out for 2 reasons. Somebody has to look after the home and the kids, and then actually women feel freer. The problem why women can't go out is because the men are there, are this thing. So there were like 40,000 women who went out. These are not small marches of 1,000, 2,000. And the mayor, television is showing pictures of the mayor at home looking after his... These are, of course, examples, but the idea is how do you... how do you bring about social change? I think that's the thing. How do we create these different cities that we want? And gender is certainly one very big axis of discrimination, inequality, injustice, lack of access, and all that. But also, as Janaki said, I think class, caste, migrant status. That's another very big thing in our cities we've been seeing in this thing, and religion, right? Definitely at these. At this point, I don't mind if some of you might have some questions. We can open it up if there's some questions from the floor, so we can make this a more inclusive conversation. Yeah.
Just to extend this kind of same thing, that if men and women are both in the same space, obviously we understand each other better. And giving an example like you only, recently I actually saw one of the a person who actually belongs in the mayor's cell in the city of Taipei, and he presented that what they have done as a strategy for the city is to make gender-neutral toilets, is to address any problem which comes up in public transport right away. So they said that if there is a problem in the bus, there are certain ways to deal with it. If that fails, they take the entire bus to the police station, so that everybody kind of understands that it's not only a single woman's problem and, it's everybody's problem. So I guess strategies like this in the city kind of encourages citizens to understand that it's everybody's issues.
Thank you. That was a good panel. I'm just now getting very concerned about the fact that we all talk about what the issues and concerns of exclusion, segregation, etc. are, but we don't design the steps at a micro level. For instance, the separate lifts for domestic workers in Gurgaon. It's an institutionalized practice. I'd like to know what the strategies for that are, just like we're developing strategies for what the city should do for inclusion, whether homeless, etc. So I think our planning tools or our strategic tools are based on old principles of, master plan and how settlements should be done. But I think we need to take up each of these issues and have a strategy around where will it be piloted, how will it be piloted, what else would it be, including for the gated communities and the whole takeover of land, public land for cars. And we really now have to work on it on a sustained basis rather than just describe it as an issue. And I think we haven't moved. I'm talking also about myself here in terms of the work we do as a collective. We need to move into some of these critical barriers and say, now what, how, and the advocacy within that context. Thank you.
Could I? Yeah. No, I also wanted to just bring in the issue of disability because, when we talk about intersectional whatever, that, it's the caste, it's the religion, it's also the disabled. And I think that is necessary across neighborhoods because, when one talks about developing infrastructure, one often then, when the government decides to do disabled friendly, in Delhi University, I know it was a disaster because all those tiles for, the tiles for visually impaired students and people, they all end in trees. So they've been done so badly that, if you followed it, you'd be like one tree and then you go around and then there's another tree and then, it's, so it was done because it had to be done in this short, it's like in February, suddenly the money is released and you have to spend it by 31st March. And then there's nobody supervising. And so, suddenly it's, again in Delhi University, the Vice-Regal Lodge was done up and all very posh and so on. But was there a lift? Was there a ramp? No. It's just that from the very beginning, the idea of inclusion has to be from the beginning. It has to be very much part of that thinking. That was one. But the other point I wanted to make was, because we've been talking about technology and WhatsApp and Twitter and Facebook and so on, I wanted to say that, Nayanthara's point in the morning about, how safe are women and men also and people when your data is not safe. Yeah. And there is increasingly a critique of WhatsApp, which has been brought up by Facebook, and what are data, when you click something on Facebook, or when you suddenly surf for clothes or shoes, why is it that when you're on Facebook, suddenly these things are popping up? And initially you think, acha, how did Facebook know that, I was looking at shoes? And then you realize, So, yeah, so I'm saying that at some level, social media has been a double-edged sword, and for young people, I speak here also as a teacher, and I see young people. There's a sense of despair, and there's a sense of, there's something amiss, and it's a part of it. I feel, and maybe in the time to come, we will learn more about this. But there's something that social media is doing, which is not making people feel good. So one is to, appropriate and to think really about what is it? What does it mean when everybody's posting only the happy pictures and badhiya kapde pehen ke khade hain, others are sitting alone in their homes and looking at what a great time everybody's having, and what is it doing to you? But also, how is that data being used, And in many sexual harassment cases today, actually, it is these sites that are being used. People are uploading photographs and so on. So I think that it is a double-edged sword, and I think one needs to proceed with great caution.
Yeah. That too, and you have to sometimes, Google is not going to go away. It's going to stay. So you have to somehow figure out ways of, using the same tools that they do to do positive messaging and drop positive images into people's, social media. So there is a whole, science to it, which actually, you can actually, if you put your mind to it, you can actually crack. It's not going to be easy, and it's going to take a lot of resources, but there is a way of kind of battling that, because these things are not going to go away. It's going to just get complicated.
we started discussion with smart city, and then ma'am talked about how the private players are playing their roles, and like I recently had the lecture in my SPA class about the development practice, planning, and finance. So I felt the importance of capital and the money in development. And then what I realized that in our panel we should have the people, those are the pivot of this capital, they're flowing, especially the banking sector. Like we right now jobs are in IT and banking sectors. Now World Bank is looking people before investing, the impact assessment they're asking, what are the social and environmental changes their money can bring into any project. But in our case in India, banking center and the people, they should come into the discussion of this kind, so they also can think about their money is going to change something, and now they should be the part of discussion. So that's my commentary.
Thank you. I think that's a very important point, is that, you know, who are we talking to? You know, and are we talking across disciplines? You know, and I think we need to work more towards that. And I take your point also, Sunita. Somewhere, what are the next steps? You know, there is a despair. You're absolutely right. It's not just social media. It's just that there is general despair. You know, in our cities. You know, they're like congested. They're polluted. I mean, you know, we're sitting in a city where many of us cannot breathe anymore. You know, I mean, it's such a critical problem which the government doesn't seem to want to address it at the level it is. You're telling us in the paper 1.7 years each Delhiite is losing every year in our lives. Yeah. But nobody's talking about what you're going to do about it, you know. So I think we need to talk across. We need to talk to, you know, people who are setting up these, you know, these missions. Yeah, we need to get our voices there. And I think that is the point, and there is a sense of frustration today. And again, really, I think because we're going to be running out of time, I'm going to give each of the speakers a last word, and then we'll have to wind up. I also get all worked up sometimes.
I shouldn't be last?
You should be first or the last.
Oh, okay. As designers, we tend to look at the world as positively as we can. Otherwise, we won't be able to create or be creative enough to change the reality that we have in front of us. So, no matter what the problem, no matter where we are today, we try not to succumb to despair. That's the first the first kind of condition in which we would like to be in, without losing sight of the real situation. Now, I feel, as it is being pointed out now, that the discussion has to become much more than people who know and people who have already found out what is going on, versus people who really matter in terms of taking decisions. The technocrats and bureaucrats and finance experts have to become a part of the discussion that we are getting into. They usually don't want to come. That's the problem, and neither do we want to call them. You know, so there is a block in both levels. People who do come, they actually use language which probably has already been too crystallized, right? For example, the finance sector, even a project finance person has already sees the city only through the commodification of resources, right? So land is a commodity, and that commodification of that resource is telling us where money should go and how money will spin, right? And that's the way it is seen. So the way cities are seen and being read, and the transverse ways in which cities could be read, I think is a question that we can start talking about. That we see the city this way, and someone else sees the city some other way. And is there a way in which we converge, or is there a way we choose to disagree? I think that is a dialogue which would have really helped in some form or the other, and it should build in time. Again, coming back to the questions of education and academia, we have to take responsibility of the fact that the future of our cities lie with the way we train our own students today here now, right? And one of the things that you talked about as a neighborhood discussion, I remember, in architecture schools, there is a full semester devoted to housing, right? And if you ask any one of us as an architecture student, what did we do in this housing studio? We will remember these three words: 2 BHK, 3 BHK, 4 BHK, right? And there will be these, tables given. So many units of 2 BHK, so many units of 3 BHK. Then where is the neighborhood, right? We are only creating 2, 3, and 4 BHK units, and it's called units, right? And then when it comes to layout, it's a question of making it fancy and look happy. But it is in that layout where the neighborhood is. Right?
So urban planning, so there's no link.
No, so there is no. We don't
planning.
Understand housing as neighborhood. Yeah. We don't understand users as communities, right? So that's the reason, I think, which is where we have a very big disjunct between the way we teach versus the way life happens.
I began with the conversations, and I think I'm going to end with that. And I was at the high-level political forum in New York a few months back, and there was this wonderful case study of this city called Medellin, which is in Colombia, which was the center of the whole drug cartel and all of those cartels, and you've seen in Narcos. And the mayor was there, and he was talking about how it took 13 years to change that city completely into an inclusive, beautiful. Even the pictures he showed was just so beautiful. You couldn't believe that Narcos was actually happening there. And it was the power of what he said, behavioral change communication. So, I was a little skeptic, but also a lot of work with the community. So I think that's the way, to go, combine the communication with working at the level of the communities. So,
yeah, I totally agree. I want to say that, on the one hand, I think as smart cities, as we see these, proceeding in the next few years, I think that one thing that we can do as citizens is to demand more accountability, and I hope that one will see that in the years to come. But also, I want to underline the fact that for me, the panel just before with the girls from Kadir, and that whole project tells me really that more community work in neighborhoods, reviving community centers, which used to be there and were there, in many states in India. I know from my fieldwork in Kerala, for instance, that, the neighborhood center, although it's very male, it needn't be like that. Reading rooms, community rooms, workshops on filmmaking, on drama, on, street plays, is really the way in which you can build a connection which is face-to-face. And I think that face-to-face, which will include men as well, is what will then open up spaces and make people feel that, yes, as citizens, you are entitled to this. It's your right.
And your responsibility.
Yeah. Thank you. I think we are running out of time. So I give Iona the...
Thank you so much. This was a brilliant roundtable, and it brings so many thoughts are racing through my head. So I don't really want to say anything, because if I say anything, I'll take up all the time. So thank you very much, and it gives us a lot of food for thought to take this forward to the next level. And we're going to start with the next phase of our 24-month project. So we've done these first 12 months and the next 12 months. And I just want to let Padmini have the next 5 minutes to talk about what we plan to do in Bangalore. And then we should have about 10 minutes left for the girls to do live performance. करना चाहते हो आप लोग? तो पहले पद्मिनी थोड़ा बोलेगी, अभी इसके बाद हम बैंगलोर में क्या करेंगे, और उसके बाद प्रिपेयर रखना, अभी गाना वाना तैयार करके रखना, क्योंकि 6 बजे हमको यहाँ से निकाल देंगे इस कमरे से. तो पद्मिनी 5 मिनट बोलेगी, उसके बाद आप लोग लाइव परफॉर्मेंस करना, ठीक है?
Thanks, Iona. So yes, it's been incredibly exciting working on the Delhi phase of this project. And now the challenge begins to take this to Bangalore. So far we've decided on working with a neighborhood in Jeevan Bhimanagar. And the interesting thing is that there are actually many resonances and similarities between Madanpur Khadar and Jeevan Bimalagar. They're both resettlement colonies. The group that we're working with is a group of Dalit youth between the ages of 12 and 17, who we actually started working with through a football project. So, they were doing early morning football. And interestingly, there was also a conversation about contestations of space, even regarding that. So basically, they were not allowed to use the football field, and we had to there were lots of conversations and fights, etc. And finally, we were given permission to work with them in that football field. So this group of individuals, we are hoping to broaden their horizons by exposing them to art, drama, music, etc., and also technology. So I will be doing similar projects with them, like mapping and the Wikipedia project. But we're hoping maybe in terms of outputs, we might create games, both using technology and board games and neighborhood games in order to create communication. And I think we're very intrigued to see how having men in the project is going to change the way that we think about mobility. And of course, it's a different city with different contexts. And that's also going to maybe transform the way that we've been working with Khadr. But I think there will be similarities as well. So there'll be enough coherence between the two sites. So watch this space, I guess. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. It's been a great day.